She told the moving company I was a hoarder. That's the part that still gets to me, even now. Not the eviction notice she slid across my own kitchen table. Not the way she called me a freeloader in front of my own grandson. The hoarder thing, because she knew it wasn't true, and she said it anyway into a phone, to a stranger, while standing in a house I built with my own 2 hands. My name is Desmond Kettering. People who've known me a long time call me Des. I'm 68 years old, widowed 4 years this past March, and until about 6 weeks ago, I was living quietly in a 4-bedroom ranch on Sycamore Bend in a suburb west of Charlotte, North Carolina. My daughter-in-law decided that house wasn't mine anymore. She decided her sister and her sister's 2 kids needed it more. She told everyone on our street that I was confused, that I'd been forgetting to turn off the stove, that my son and her were exploring memory care options. She had a brochure on the counter. A goddamn brochure with a smiling old man in a cardigan holding a watering can. What my daughter-in-law didn't know is that I sold my fence and gate manufacturing company in 2011 for $41 million, kept the property holdings under a different name, and over the next 14 years I rolled most of it into commercial real estate across the Carolinas and Southern Virginia. About $690 million worth, last appraisal. I drive a 2008 Silverado with a cracked rear bumper. I buy my jeans at Tractor Supply. I let her think whatever she wanted to think. That was my mistake, and it was also, eventually, my advantage. If you're still watching, do me a favor and subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're from. I read them. I really do. Now let me tell you how a 68-year-old man in a Carhartt jacket ended his daughter-in-law's housewarming party by walking in with a property attorney, a notarized affidavit, and 3 eviction notices in a manila folder. Let me back up. My son married her 4 years ago, 6 months after my wife Eleanor died. I won't lie to you. I had reservations. Eleanor would have had reservations too. My daughter-in-law came on strong from day one. She'd been an event planner in Raleigh, the kind who runs other people's weddings. And she had opinions about everything. How I folded napkins. How I parked. How I should modernize the kitchen Eleanor had picked out tile by tile in 1994. I bit my tongue. My son was happy, or seemed to be, and that was enough for me. I figured time would smooth the edges. They moved into my house about 18 months ago. The story was that they needed to save for a down payment. My son had taken a hit during a layoff, and his new job paid less than his old one. My daughter-in-law had quit the events business to start what she called a lifestyle brand on Instagram. As far as I could tell, the lifestyle brand was her in linen dresses posting about gratitude, while my son ate cereal for dinner. But it wasn't my business, and I had 4 empty bedrooms in a house that echoed since Eleanor passed. So I said yes. The first 6 months were fine. The next 6 were tense. The last 6 were a slow, deliberate campaign to push me out of my own home, and I didn't see it for what it was until it was almost too late. It started small. She rearranged my workshop in the garage, said it was a fire hazard the way I had it. 43 years of woodworking tools, all of them where I could find them with my eyes closed, and she put them in plastic bins labeled with the label maker. I couldn't find my own awl for 2 weeks. When I finally asked, she said, "Oh, Desmond, I donated some of the duplicates. You don't need 3 hammers, do you?" 3 hammers. I had 3 because they were 3 different weights for 3 different jobs. But I just nodded and said, "All right." That was the mistake. Nodding and saying all right. Then it was the dining room. Eleanor's china. 40 years of dinners on those plates. Every Thanksgiving, every Easter, every Christmas Eve. When my son was small and would put his cookie on the corner of his plate for Santa. My daughter-in-law decided the cabinet was dated and asked if she could restyle it. I said okay, thinking she meant the cabinet. 2 weeks later, the china was in a box in the garage. The cabinet held her crystal vases from Home Goods and 3 framed photos of her with people I didn't recognize. I went down to the garage one night, and I opened the box and I took out 1 teacup, the blue one with the little gold rim. The one Eleanor used for her morning tea every single day for 26 years. I sat on the workbench and I held it in both hands, and I cried for the first time since the funeral. And then I put the cup back. Because I am a grown man and I had decided to be patient. I should have stopped being patient that night. In April, she told me her sister was going through a hard time. Her sister, who I'd met exactly twice, both times at holidays where she barely spoke to me. The sister had 2 kids, 10 and 12, and a husband who had apparently left. My daughter-in-law cried at the kitchen table. She really did, tears and everything. She said, "Desmond, I don't know what to do. They have nowhere to go." I said her sister and the kids were welcome to stay for a while. I meant a few weeks, maybe a month. That was the second mistake. The first was nodding. The second was being a soft touch when someone cried in my kitchen. The sister moved in on a Tuesday in late April. She brought enough stuff to fill 2 pickup trucks. She took the guest room and put the 2 kids in what used to be my son's old room. Within a week, my daughter-in-law was hosting family dinners that I wasn't invited to. I'd come in from the garage and they'd already be eating. "Oh, we figured you ate already," she'd say. I hadn't. I'd just been outside, sanding down a cradle I was making for a coworker's grandkid. The kids were polite enough in that surface way kids learn when their parents tell them to be polite. The sister was something else. She was 34, going on entitled. She talked to me like I was the janitor in my own house. "Hey, can you not run the dryer at night? The noise comes through the wall. Hey, the kids are doing homework. Can you keep the TV down? Hey, do you really need the garage light on this late? Hey, 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 hey." Like I was a vending machine, she was tapping with her foot. I let it go. I let it all go. Because I thought, this is temporary, and family is family, and Eleanor would have wanted me to be kind. But here's the thing, nobody warns you about being kind. There are people in this world who read kindness as a balance sheet. They look at what you've given, and they don't see generosity. They see weakness. They start to wonder what else they can take. By the end of May, my daughter-in-law had a new tone. The crying was gone. The "Desmond, I don't know what to do" was gone. In its place was something brisk and managerial. "Desmond, we need to talk." Always those words, like she was firing me from being a person in my own house. The first big talk was on a Sunday. My son was there, but he wasn't really there, if you know what I mean. He sat on the couch and looked at his phone the whole time. My daughter-in-law had a notebook. An actual notebook, like this was a board meeting. "Desmond," she said, "we've been thinking about the living situation." I said, "What about it?" She said, "We think it would be healthier for everyone if you had your own space." My own space. In my own house. I asked her what she meant. She told me there was a lovely assisted living community out by Lake Norman. She'd already taken a tour. She'd already gotten brochures. She slid one across the coffee table. "The cardigan man. The watering can." I said, "I'm 68. I'm not assisted living material." She said, "Desmond, we've all noticed things." I said, "What things?" She said, "The stove. You left it on. Twice." I had not left it on. Not once. I knew it, and she knew it. But she said it with such calm authority, like she was reading from a chart, that for a second I almost wondered if I had. That's the thing about manipulation. It makes you doubt your own memory. It's the cleanest, cruelest trick there is. I looked at my son. He didn't look up from his phone. I looked back at her. I said, "I'll think about it." She smiled. She actually smiled. She said, "That's all we're asking." That night I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, Hollister Carmichael. I've worked with Hollister for 22 years. He drew up the paperwork for the company sale. He set up the holding entities. He knows where every dollar I have is parked and how it's titled. I told him what was happening. He was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then he said, "Desmond, the house is owned by Sycamore Bend Holdings, LLC. You're the sole member. Your son has no claim on it. Your daughter-in-law has no claim on it. They are guests at your pleasure." I said, "I know." He said, "Do you want to remove them?" I said, Not yet. I want to see how far she'll take it. He said, Des, that's a dangerous game with someone like this. I said, Hollister, I've been playing dangerous games since I was 18 working roofs in August. I'm not worried about this one. The second call was to my property manager, a woman named Pilar Estevez, who runs the day-to-day on the commercial holdings out of an office in Greensboro. I asked her to pull together a complete portfolio summary, current valuations, and a clean printout of the Sycamore Bend deed and tax records going back to 1989. 2 business days. She said, Are you all right, Desmond? I said, I will be. The third call was to my insurance agent, a man named Burchell Pickett. Been with him since 1996. I asked him to flag the homeowner's policy on Sycamore Bend for any unauthorized changes. He said, Funny you should ask. I said, What does that mean? He said, Someone called last week asking about adding a name to the policy and updating the primary contact. I told them only the policyholder could do that. They hung up. She'd already tried. I sat in the dark at the kitchen island for a long time after that. The house was quiet. Everyone was asleep. I thought about Eleanor, what she would have said. Eleanor was the kindest person I ever met, but she was not soft. She told me once, near the end, just don't let anyone treat you like furniture. That's what I was, furniture. A worn-out recliner she wanted to drag to the curb. The next 2 weeks, I played dumb. I want to be honest with you about that. Because it might sound cold. I let her think she was winning. I let her bring 2 more brochures home. I let her introduce me to a woman from the assisted living place who came over for coffee and asked me, in front of my daughter-in-law, whether I remembered to take my pills. I don't take any pills. I take a vitamin D in the winter. That's it. But I smiled at the woman and I said, most days. My daughter-in-law gave me a look across the table. Sad, concerned, performed. That same week I drove out to one of my commercial properties off I-77, a 6-tenant strip with a barbershop and a dialysis clinic and a bunch of other small operations. I sat in the parking lot in my old truck, and I watched people come and go. I owned the ground under their feet, and not one of them knew it. I owned 23 other properties like it. I owned the medical office building my daughter-in-law had once taken my son to for a torn rotator cuff. She'd sat in a waiting room I owned and complained about the parking, which I also owned. I knew because Pilar had pulled the records. The irony almost made me laugh out loud in the truck. The hammer came down on a Friday in early June. I walked in from the workshop. My daughter-in-law was at the kitchen table with a folder. The sister was leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. My son was nowhere. The 2 kids were at school. She'd timed it. She said, Desmond, sit down. I sat down, not because she told me to. Because I'd been waiting for this. She slid the folder across to me. Inside was a 1-page document, a family agreement. She typed it herself. It said I would vacate Sycamore Bend within 30 days, that I would move into the assisted living facility, that my son and daughter-in-law would assume responsibility for the property, and that I would sign over my interest in the home to facilitate future planning. There was a signature line at the bottom with my name typed under it. I read it twice. I looked up at her. I said, What is this? She said, It's what's best for everyone. I said, This isn't a legal document. She said, It's a family agreement. Once you sign it, we'll have the lawyers make it formal. I said, Whose lawyers? She smiled. She said, We'll handle that. The sister, leaning against the counter, said, Look, Desmond, nobody wants to make this harder than it has to be. I looked at her. The woman who'd been living in my house, eating my food, parking her car in my driveway for 6 weeks. I said, And you're part of this conversation because... She said, Because I'm family. I almost laughed. I really did. I had to swallow it down. I said, very calmly, When would I need to leave? My daughter-in-law brightened. She thought I was caving. She said, We've reserved a unit for you starting July 15th, so we'd need you out by the 12th so we can do some painting. Painting. They were going to repaint Eleanor's house. Eleanor picked the color of every wall in that house. The pale yellow in the breakfast nook, the sage green in the den. Painting. I said, and what happens to the house? My daughter-in-law said, my sister and the kids will take the back bedrooms. We'll convert your room into a home office. Eventually we might do an addition. I said, eventually. She said, Desmond, I know this is hard, but it's time. It's time. Like I was an old dog at the vet. I said, can I take a few days to look this over? She said, of course. But Desmond, the unit at Lake Norman won't hold forever. And honestly, this is the kindest version of this conversation we can have. The kindest version. I will remember that phrase until I die. I took the folder, I went to my bedroom, I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I looked at the photo of Eleanor on the dresser. The one from our 25th anniversary, her in that blue dress she loved, and I said out loud, Ellie, I'm done being patient. That night, I called Hollister back. I told him everything. The fake family agreement, the brochure woman, the painting, the kindest version. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he said, Desmond, what do you want to do? I said, I want to do this in front of everyone. He said, when? I said, she mentioned a housewarming. She's been planning it for weeks. She wants to introduce her sister to the neighbors as the new lady of the house. Some Saturday afternoon thing with wine and a charcuterie board. It's in 2 weeks. He said, you want to walk into her party. I said, I want to walk into my party. In my house. With the deed in my hand, and I want her to find out who I am at the same time the neighbors do. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, Des, I've been waiting 4 years to be in the room when that happens. I'll be there. What else do you need? I told him, 3 eviction notices, properly drawn up under North Carolina law, naming my daughter-in-law, her sister, and the 2 minor children as occupants of record. 30-day notice to vacate. No cause required for a tenancy at sufferance. A certified copy of the deed. A printout of the title history. A summary of my real estate holdings. Just the headline numbers. Nothing showy, just enough to make the point. And a notarized affidavit confirming that no document existed anywhere transferring any ownership interest to my son or his wife. Hollister said, I'll have it ready in 8 days. I said, have it ready in 7. The next morning I told my daughter-in-law I'd been thinking about it, and that I had some questions, but I was leaning toward agreeing. Her whole face changed. She hugged me. She actually hugged me. She actually hugged me. She said, Desmond, I'm so proud of you for being open to this. Proud of me. I felt my jaw tighten, but I made it smile back. For the next 2 weeks, I was the model cooperative old man. I let her show me more brochures. I let her tell me which of my things I'd be able to bring. She told me there'd be limited space, so I'd need to edit my life down to essentials. Those were her exact words. Edit my life down to essentials. 43 years of woodworking tools. Eleanor's china, the cradle I made for my son when he was born, and that sat in the attic waiting for grandkids. Edit it down. She set up an appointment with an estate sale company. I was supposed to walk through the house and tag what I wanted to keep. The rest would be sold or donated. She had little colored stickers, green to keep, red to sell, yellow for donation. She handed me a sheet of green stickers and said, Don't be too sentimental, Desmond. We can't move everything. I put a green sticker on Eleanor's china cabinet. I put one on my workbench. I put one on the cradle. I put one on the recliner where I sat with Eleanor the night before her surgery. I went through that house and I put a green sticker on everything I loved, which was most of it, because that house was 45 years of my life. My daughter-in-law watched me from the doorway, with a tight little smile, and at one point she said, "Desmond, you've used almost the whole sheet." I said, "I'll buy you another sheet." She did not laugh. The housewarming was set for Saturday, June 22nd, 2 to 6 in the afternoon. She had it catered. She had a florist. She had a sign by the front walk that said, "Welcome me to O'Herm" in white letters on a chalkboard. Our home. I saw that sign Friday afternoon when I came in from the workshop, and I had to stand in the driveway for a full minute and breathe. She'd told me to make myself scarce during the party. She said it would be less confusing for the guests if I wasn't there. She suggested I go to a movie. She gave me a $20 bill for the ticket. I took the 20. I have not spent it. It is in my wallet right now. I look at it sometimes when I need to remember. Saturday morning, I got up at 6. I shaved. I put on a clean white shirt and the navy blazer Eleanor bought me for our 30th anniversary, the one I'd only worn twice. I put on my good leather belt. I put on the watch my father gave me when I graduated high school. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I didn't recognize the man looking back. He looked taller than I felt. I drove out to a diner on Highway 16, and I ate a slow breakfast. Eggs, bacon, grits, coffee. The waitress called me Han and asked if I was going somewhere special. I said, "I'm going to take my house back." She said, "Well, all right then. Coffee's on me." At 1:30, I parked my truck 2 blocks from the house and walked. Cars were already lining the street. I recognized half of them, the Bellingers, the Auchintois, the retired couple from the corner whose name I could never quite remember, the guy who'd bought the McAllister place last year. 20, maybe 25 families. My daughter-in-law had been busy. Housed was waiting on the corner of Sycamore and Ridgepoint in his car, a navy Buick. He got out when he saw me. He had a leather folio under his arm. He said, "You ready, Des?" I said, "I've been ready for 6 weeks." We walked to the house together. The chalkboard sign was there. "Welcome to O'Herm." There was music coming from the backyard. Some folksy acoustic thing. I could hear laughter, the clink of glasses. I walked right up the front walk, my own front walk, the bricks I'd laid myself in 1991, and I opened the front door. The foyer was full of strangers, people with wine glasses, women in sundresses, a couple of kids running through with goldfish crackers in their fists. My daughter-in-law saw me from across the room. Her face went through 3 colors, white, then red, then a kind of grayish color I'd never seen on a human being before. She came at me fast. She tried to keep her voice low. She said, "Desmond, what are you doing here?" I said, "I live here." She said, "We talked about this." I said, "We did," and I changed my mind. The sister had come up behind her. She said, "Are you serious right now? In front of everyone?" I said, "I am very serious." My son appeared at the edge of the kitchen. He looked at me. He looked at his wife. He looked at the folio under Hollister's arm. He looked like a man watching the floor of a building he was standing on. Crack open. My daughter-in-law turned to the crowd and gave a little laugh, that performance laugh, and said, "Excuse me, everyone, family moment. Just give us a minute." She tried to steer me toward the den. I didn't move. I said, in a voice loud enough to carry, "I'd actually like everyone to hear this." The room went quiet. The folksy music kept playing in the backyard. Someone turned it down. People started drifting in from the patio. The Bellingers, the Auchintois, the retired couple. They knew something was happening. They could smell it. I said, "Most of you know me. I'm Desmond Kettering. I've lived on the street since 1989. I built the planters out front of the Halverson house. I poured the patio of the Whitlocks. I taught half your kids to ride their bikes in this cul-de-sac." A few people nodded. Mr. Auchintois gave me a small, confused smile. "Some of you may have heard recently that I'm moving to assisted living, that I've been having some memory problems, that my son and his wife are stepping up to take care of me and the family home." My daughter-in-law said, "Desmond, please." I kept going. I said, "I want to clear up a few things. I am not moving to assisted living. I do not have memory problems, and the family home is mine. It always has been. She said, Desmond, this is not the place. I said, it is exactly the place. I turned to Hollister. He opened the folio. He took out the first document, a certified copy of the deed. He handed it to me. I held it up so people could see it. I said, this is the deed to 42 Waite, Sycamore Bend. It is held by Sycamore Bend Holdings, LLC, a North Carolina limited liability company. I am the sole member of that company. I have owned this house free and clear since 1989. There is no mortgage. There is no co-owner. There is no joint title. My daughter-in-law has no ownership interest. My son has no ownership interest. They are guests in my house. They have been guests in my house for 18 months. The sister opened her mouth. I held up a hand. I said, I am not done. Hollister handed me the second document. The title history. I said, if anyone here has been told by my daughter-in-law that I am confused about who owns this house, or that I am no longer competent to make my own decisions, I would invite them to read the public record. Property records in Mecklenburg County are searchable online. Anyone could have checked. Anyone. I looked right at her when I said it. My daughter-in-law was crying now. Not the kitchen table crying. Real, panicked crying. She said, Desmond, can we please not do this in front of everyone? I said, you did it in front of everyone. You told my neighbors I had dementia. You told them I left the stove on. You told them I needed to be put away. You hired a strange woman to come into my house and ask me about my pills. You typed up a fake agreement and asked me to sign over my home. You did all of that in front of everyone. Now I'm doing this in front of everyone. I turned to the room. I said, I want to address something else because I know how rumors travel on this street. I am not broke. I am not a sad old widower being supported by my son. I sold my company in 2011. Some of you remember my company, Kettering Fence and Iron. I sold it for $41 million. I rolled most of that into commercial real estate. I currently own 24 commercial properties across the Carolinas and Southern Virginia. The current appraised value of my holdings is just under $700 million. You could have heard a pin drop. I am not exaggerating. The kids had stopped running. Someone's wine glass slipped half an inch on a coaster, and the sound was the loudest thing in the room. My daughter-in-law sat down on the bottom step of the staircase. Just sat. Her dress fanned out around her. I said, I wore work clothes my whole life because I was a working man. I drive an old truck because I love that truck. My wife and I lived simply because we liked it that way. None of that meant we were poor. It meant we knew the difference between having money and needing to prove it. I looked at my daughter-in-law. I said, You assumed for 18 months. You assumed for 18 months. You assumed your way into a fake family agreement and a brochure for a place by a lake. You assumed your way into telling Mrs. Okonkwo I'd left the stove on. You assumed your way into thinking I was something you could move out of the way. She didn't speak. She couldn't. I said, Hollister. He handed me the third folder. 3 envelopes inside, white, business-sized with the firm's return address in the corner. I said, these are formal notices to vacate. 30 days, as North Carolina law requires for tenancies at sufferance. 1 for my daughter-in-law. 1 for her sister. 1 naming the 2 minor children as additional occupants of record. I handed them to her, 1 at a time. She took them like they were burning her hands. The sister said, You can't be serious. You can't kick out children. I said, I am not kicking out children. I am ending the residency of the adults who brought them here without my consent. What you do with the children, where you take them, is your decision. It was your decision the day you packed them up and moved them into a house that was not yours. She said, We have nowhere to go. I said, You had somewhere to go 6 weeks ago. You can have somewhere to go again. You have 30 days. I suggest you start tomorrow. My son finally spoke. He said, Dad. I looked at him. My son, 41 years old, The kid I taught to ride a bike in this cul-de-sac. The kid Eleanor and I drove to college in a U-Haul with his clothes in trash bags. The kid who stood in my kitchen for 18 months while his wife dismantled my life and didn't say a single word. I said, "Son." He said, "Can we talk?" I said, "We can, but not today. Today is for the people who needed to hear this in public. Tomorrow, if you want to come to my hotel, we can talk. Just you, not her. Not until I say otherwise." He nodded. He looked like he might be sick. I turned back to the room. I said, "I am sorry to interrupt your afternoon. I am especially sorry to the Bellingers, who I know drove in from Mooresville, and to the Okonkwo's, who brought what looks like a very nice plant. Please, finish your wine. Eat the food. It's already paid for. I won't be staying. I have packing to supervise. Mine, not theirs." I walked out the front door. Hollister walked with me. Nobody followed for about 10 seconds, and then I heard the front door open behind me and one set of footsteps, and I knew without turning around that it was Mrs. Okonkwo. She caught up to me on the sidewalk. She put her hand on my arm. She said, "Desmond, I am so sorry. I should have known better." I said, "It's all right, Adaze. She's persuasive." She said, "Eleanor would be proud of you today." I had to stop walking for a second. I had to put my hand on a mailbox. Hollister stood there quietly while I got myself together. Then I said, "Thank you. That's the thing I needed to hear." I went to a hotel that night. A nice one downtown, not a Hampton Inn. The kind of place I usually thought was wasteful. I figured I'd earned wasteful for one night. I ordered a steak from room service, and I ate it at the little desk by the window looking out at the lights, and I thought about how Eleanor would have laughed at the room service steak. She always said hotel food was just airport food with a tablecloth. The next morning, my son came. He came alone, like I'd asked. He sat in the chair across from me, and he didn't look at me for a long time. Finally, he said, "I didn't know about most of it, Dad." I said, "How much did you know?" He said, "I knew about the brochure. I knew about Lake Norman. I didn't know about the agreement. I didn't know she called your insurance. I didn't know about the woman she had over." I said, "Did you know about the stove story?" He was quiet. Then he said, "I heard her tell Mrs. Bellinger. I should have said something." I said, "Yes, you should have." He started crying. He's a 41-year-old man, and he sat in that hotel room and cried like he was 9 years old. I let him cry. I didn't reach across. Eleanor would have reached across. "I am not Eleanor." I said when he was done, "What do you want to do?" He said, "I want to fix it." I said, "You can't fix what she did. You can decide what you do now." You said, "Can I stay in the house?" I said, "No, not while you're married to her." I'm sorry. That's where I am right now. Maybe it changes. Maybe it doesn't. But for the next 30 days, I want all 3 of them out, and I want you out with them. Because you let it happen, and that has a cost too. He nodded. He didn't argue. I think he knew. I said, "I'll help you with a security deposit on an apartment." I will not help her. If you want to stay with her, that's your choice, and you'll figure out the deposit together. If you want to leave, I'll help you start over. I will not make that decision for you. He said, "Dad, she's my wife." I said, "I know. That's why I won't make it for you." He left. I haven't heard from him in 9 days as I'm telling you this. I don't know which way he's going to choose. I have a guess. I'm trying not to dwell on it. My daughter-in-law called me 4 times in the first week. I picked up once, the 3rd call, just to hear what she'd say. She'd moved through 3 stages by then. First, it was apology. Real sounding, the kind that almost gets you. Then, it was bargaining. Could we work out a rent arrangement? Could she stay just for the kids' sake? Could she be a property manager for me? Then, it was anger. She said I was destroying my son's marriage. She said I was a vindictive old man. She said I'd manipulated the situation by hiding my money. That one almost made me laugh. I hid my money. That's the part she landed on. I said, I didn't hide anything. I lived my life. You drew conclusions. She said, you let me think you were poor. I said, I let you think whatever you wanted to think. You didn't ask. You assumed. There's a difference. She hung up on me. I haven't picked up since. The sister was gone within 2 weeks. I found out from Mrs. Oakenwell. She packed up the kids and driven to her parents' place in Asheville. My daughter-in-law is still at the house as of yesterday, but the 30 days run out next Tuesday, and Hollister has a process server on standby in case she gets cute about it. Here is what I want you to take from all this. If you've stayed with me this long, I am not a smart man. I am a working man who got lucky with timing and bought the right pieces of dirt at the right time. But I learned one thing in 43 years of running a business and 45 years of being married to the kindest, sharpest woman who ever lived. The world is full of people who will read your quiet as weakness. They will read your old truck as poverty. They will read your kindness as obligation. They will look at the worn knees of your jeans and decide you are something they can move around like a piece of furniture. Don't let them. You don't have to be loud about it. You don't have to be cruel. You don't even have to be angry most days. You just have to remember in the quiet center of yourself that you know who you are and you know what is yours, and you do not owe anyone an apology for either one. Eleanor used to say, be soft until it costs you something, then be steel. I was soft for 68 years. I'm steel now. I think she'd be all right with that. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Drop me a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if you got somebody in your life right now who's reading your patience as a green light, do me one favor. Don't wait as long as I did. The kitchen table, the brochure, the colored stickers. Don't wait for the stickers. That's all I've got for today. Take care of yourselves out there. I've been sitting with this story for a few weeks now, and the thing that keeps coming back to me isn't the housewarming. It isn't the colored stickers or the brochure or the woman they sent over to ask about my pills. It's that teacup, the blue one with the gold rim, the one I held in the garage that night and put back in the box because I had decided to be patient. I think about that cup a lot because that was the moment I taught my daughter-in-law that she could take more, and she did. Here is what I've learned, and I'm 68 years old, so take it for what it's worth. Every time you swallow something that needs to be said, you are not keeping the peace. You are signing a permission slip. People who are looking for an opening don't see your silence as grace. They see it as runway. The 43 years of tools she rearranged, the china she boxed up in the garage, the dinners I wasn't invited to. Each one of those was a test, and I passed every one of them by staying quiet. And every passing grade I gave her was a green light to go further. By the time she slid that fake agreement across my kitchen table, she wasn't being bold. She was being logical. I had taught her, lesson by lesson, that I would not push back. That's the cause and effect part of this whole thing. She didn't wake up one morning and decide to steal my house. I helped her build the staircase, one knotted head at a time. So what I want to say to anyone out there who recognizes themselves in this is, you don't have to be cruel, and you don't have to be loud, but you do have to be honest. Honesty is a form of respect, for other people and for yourself. When my daughter-in-law called me confused, I should have said on the first day, that's not true, and we are not going to pretend it is. I didn't. I was trying to be kind. But kindness without honesty is just performance. And performance always costs you eventually. The other thing is this. Strength isn't something you announce. It's something you have in reserve. I let her think I was weak for a year and a half, and that was on me. But I want you to understand that the steel underneath was always there. It was there when I was 18 working roofs. It was there when I buried Eleanor. It was there when I sat at the diner on Highway 16 the morning of the party and ordered eggs from a waitress who called me Han. You don't need a big bank account or a property attorney to find that steel. You just need to remember that you are not furniture, and you never were, and nobody gets to decide what room you belong in except you. Eleanor told me once, be soft until it costs you something, then be steel I waited too long to listen. Don't wait as long as I did.